Problem is that? All right, well, let's move ahead. I call this talk a constitutional convention under a microscope. Right? I'm going to start off with a little bit of, I don't think I need the mic. Let me know if I do.
Yeah, you do need it.
I want everybody to
Need the mic.
need the mic. Okay. I put up a little bit of what I call lost awareness. This is something that Americans used to know and a lot of Americans don't know today. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. So we've got a great Constitution and we want to make sure it stays. We want to keep it and not take it away. I'm going to skip ahead here because I'm only supposed to talk for half an hour. All right, I got a question for everyone here. All right, do current government officials obey the limitations on their powers contained in the Constitution? No. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Here's the next question. Will current government officials who don't abide by the existing limitations honor the limitations in a new amendment?
No.
Yes.
So then why are we here?
Yes.
It depends. Well, we'll see. Okay. The real need is better government officials, especially in the House of Representatives. And I'll make that case later and tell you why I'm focusing on the House of Representatives. Right? Now, there are people who want to amend the Constitution. They claim to want improvement. But they will open it up for a complete overhaul and call for a constitutional convention. Now, you can call it a convention of the states, you can call it something else, you can call it this, you can call it that. There's only one process that's in the Constitution itself, and it's called a constitutional convention. So we're going to stick with that terminology and not talk about a convention of the states or anything else. A constitutional convention is what we should be discussing. There are two ways to have a constitutional convention. There are two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way is 2/3 of both houses of Congress agree to propose amendments. Such amendments must be then ratified by 3/4 of the states. This process had led to 27 amendments. 27 amendments in much more than 200 years of the existence of the Constitution. Now that says one thing. It says one of two things. It says either that the Constitution was pretty good in the first place and didn't need amendment, or it says that the people are too silly or too involved in fluff and other things to not even bother with it. Well, now, let's look at the 27 amendments. The first 10, of course, are the Bill of Rights. And I consider that as much a part of the original Constitution as the Constitution itself. Right? So we're down to 17. And then we see that there's one amendment to outlaw the manufacture and distribution of alcohol, which was later nullified by another amendment that canceled the First Amendment. So there's two that canceled each other. So we're down to 15. We have 15 amendments in almost 240 years. I think that says something good about the Constitution. Now, the other process for amending the Constitution is the Constitutional Convention. 2/3 of the states petition Congress, that's key, Congress, to create a con-con. All amendments resulting from this convention must be ratified by 3/4 of the states if the convention hasn't altered or abolished the process for the states to amend. Right? Can a constitutional convention alter the process for the states? Well, we've only had one constitutional convention in the history of our country. It was held under the Articles of Confederation, which is the government of the United States during the War for Independence. Now, the Articles of Confederation required that if you're going to amend it, you have to get it unanimous. You have to get all 13 states. So they got together to revised the Articles of Confederation via the amendment process, and they said, well, this is crazy. This thing isn't worth amending, and they got rid of it. They just simply, in effect, tore it up and threw it away. The Articles of Confederation were dead. And for the period of the Constitutional Convention until the time that it was ratified, the new Constitution, we didn't have a federal government. Can that happen again? What they did was also alter the process for the states to ratify. They went from a unanimous 13 down to 3/4, 9. Where did they get the authority to do that? Well, it turns out that a constitutional convention is, in effect, a sovereign body. It can do whatever it wants. And it was shown by the tossing out of the Articles of Confederation and coming up with a whole new constitution. The U.S. Constitution, Alexander Hamilton said, amendments are for remedying defects, not for enacting new laws. So if there's a defect in the Constitution, you want to amend it to take care of the defect. A convention of the states, there's no mention of any such thing in the Constitution of the United States. Absolutely no mention. Go to Article 5 in the Constitution and they talk about a constitutional convention. Ratification by the states, the 1787 Con had a mandate only to alter the Articles of Confederation. That was their mandate. But it canceled the Articles and even changed the requirements from unanimous approval of amendments to only 3/4 of the states needed for approving the new Constitution, and then adding new amendments after that. So they can do what they want. The Constitutional Convention is not limited. Now, there are myths regarding a Constitutional Convention. The myths are that the states can control a Con. That's a myth. No, they can't. Once it starts, then it's a sovereign body. Amendments can be limited is a myth. No, you can't limit the amendments. In fact, the only Constitutional Convention in the history of our country proved that that was the case. They threw away the other one and started a whole new process. A myth, state ratification process will bar mischief. No. If there might not even be a state ratification process. That's the point that has to be considered. A Con can't change the whole Constitution. It can, and it did in 1787. A convention of the states is allowed under Article 5? No, a convention of the states is not allowed under Article 5. The process in Article 5 said states petition Congress to call a constitutional convention. So who's in charge? Are the states still in charge? No. Congress is in charge, right? Nancy Pelosi's in charge. Right? Harry Reid's in charge, right? And even some of these Republicans that I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for. Although I do believe that there are more good Republicans today than there were previously. Okay, now, if you have a constitutional convention, let's ask some questions. How do you choose the delegates? There's no process for that. How many delegates per state? No process for that. Expenses, who will pay the people who go to the Constitutional Convention? Who's going to be the chairman? Again, is it going to be Harry Reid? Right? Where to hold the Con? Are you going to hold it in the East Coast and keep people from the West from wanting to come because it's all the way across the country? I don't know. What about the safety of the delegates? Who's going to take care of it? I mean, you're going to have a Ferguson, Missouri type situation while they're meeting in the Constitutional Convention? Right? So all of these questions are answered by the Constitution itself. Article 5 says the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And Article 1, Section 8 grants power to Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers in Section 8 and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So Congress will decide. They will decide what? They will decide how to choose the delegates. They will decide how many delegates per state. They will decide the expenses. They will figure out a way to pay the people who go to it. They will select the chairman. They will decide where to hold the con. They will, the safety of the delegates. Now, would you want to turn all of that over to some of the people who are in Congress today?
No.
Nor would I. Nor would I. Who favors a con? Right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of quick fix artists. Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, has been mentioned. Limbaugh, Hannity, and Beck, quick fix artists in my view. The National Tax Limitation Committee, National Taxpayers Union, the Goldwater Institute. I called up down to Goldwater Institute. I've met Barry Goldwater Jr. over the years, and I asked to be put through to him. He answered the phone. I said, Mr. Goldwater, John McManus from John Birch Society. Oh, he said, how you doing? What's up? I said, I'm just calling to ask, is it true that the Goldwater Institute is in favor of a con? He said, yes, it is. And I said, and you are yourself? Yes, yes, I am. I said, I guess that's the end of the discussion, right? And it was, right? I'm sorry to hear that. Well, anyhow, there are other people. George Soros' name has been mentioned. It's the bottom of my list. George Soros doesn't directly fund a lot of these things. He funds some of the activities indirectly, right? Things like the Wolfpack organization and some of these others. There are leftists who favor a con. The Young Turks, that's I think the Soros-funded organization. Harvard University's Lawrence Lessig, who recently came back from another Bilderberger meeting. The Alliance for Democracy, the Code Pink, the Independent Progressive Network. I hate the way they use this word progressive. Anybody who says he's a progressive in my way is regressive. Progressive Democrats of America, Sierra Club, Vermont for Single Payer, right? Opponents of a con. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Phyllis Schlafly, Edwin Vieira, Tom DeWeese, former Justice Warren Burger, former Justice Arthur Goldberg, late Judge Robert Bork, Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard, Professor Charles Rice of Notre Dame, Professor Gerald Gunther, Stanford, John Birch Society. A lot of people are opponents, more opponents. Some on the left, American Civil Liberties Union, American Federation of Teachers, Americans for Democratic Action, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the NAACP, National Organization for Women, People for the American Way. Some of these groups worry that the Bill of Rights might be canceled, right? And they should worry about that. So it's quite a mixture of different people. Now, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger stated in a letter, the participants in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 had no authority to write a constitution. They were authorized only to revise the Articles of Confederation. But when they got to Philadelphia, they paid no attention to those limits and wisely threw the whole thing away and wrote the Constitution. Right? And that could happen again. Now, if it was thrown away today, if our Constitution that we have today was thrown away, what might come afterward? Something that James Madison and George Washington and some of the other founding fathers would put together? I doubt it. I doubt it very, very sincerely. Right? Former Chief Justice Warren Burger, he isn't opposed to amendments. He expressed his opposition to a constitutional convention that would have the power to void the entire Constitution. Now, are there any good amendments that I would favor? Yeah, I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 16, the federal income tax. I would like to see repeal of the Amendment 17, the direct election of senators. There are very few Americans who realize that the purpose of having two houses in the federal government was one to represent the people and the other to represent the states. Right? And the states were to choose who would be their senators. And that was changed to a direct election of senators. So now we have a House of Representatives, the voice of the people, and a Senate, the voice of the people. Right? And the power of the states has been cast adrift. Now, many of the people who favor a constitutional convention are anxious for a balanced budget amendment. Right? They say, look, we've got $18 trillion indebted that they admit to, and you can go on from that, and you'll add up to well over $100 trillion in unfunded obligations that the federal government has already passed. An enormous amount of indebtedness. It's a hard to imagine number of dollars that they're talking about. So they say, okay, we got to have a balanced budget amendment. But expecting government officials to honor an amendment when they already don't honor the Constitution makes no sense. Some balanced budget amendment proposals allow for 60% in Congress to override it. Some call for tax increases if the budget isn't balanced. That's one way of balancing the budget, right? Increase the taxes. Some say budget doesn't have to be balanced if there's a war or a national security threat. Some say balanced budget provisions wouldn't take effect for 5 years, meaning at least trillions more added to the already enormous debt in the meantime. And then some say that the way to get around the deficit problem is to declare some expenditures off budget. That's pretty clever, isn't it? And balanced budget amendments ignore the enormous deficit already accumulated, $18 trillion plus many more trillions of unfunded obligations. Now, there are good ways to balance the budget, and this is what the John Birch Society is in favor of. Congress can cut spending programs for unconstitutional programs. Congress can nullify laws and programs. That's what should be done. Let's not tinker with the Constitution. Unused power in Article 1, Section 7. It actually says that all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. The power of the purse at the federal level resides in the House of Representatives. If a majority in the House of Representatives say no more foreign aid, no more this, no more that, no more that, that's it. There's nothing the Senate can do about it, nothing the President can do about it, nothing the Supreme Court can do about it. Not even the New York Times can do anything about it. That's what we ought to be focusing on. What are some unconstitutional federal programs that Congress can stop by simply stopping the funding of them? Foreign aid, education, Common Core, yeah. Housing, energy, medical care, etc., etc., etc. On and on you go. Added authority, Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Go back over that list. Can anybody show me the word education in the Constitution of the United States? It's not there. Can you show me housing? Can you show me energy? Can you show me medical care? Can you show me foreign aid? And yet this goes on and on and on. Right? We've dropped the ball. We, the American people, have dropped the ball. We're allowing this to happen to ourselves. It's time to take the ball back and get busy. Cut spending via the Constitution. No federal expenditures for foreign aid, education. Well, we've gone over all that, right? All right, now let's look at some contrasting proposals here. Use Article 1, Section 7 to cut spending. You need 218 in the House of Representatives. That's a majority. There are 435. 218 is just over the 50%. You don't need anybody in the Senate, and there's no role for state ratifications. So the total you need to cut spending is 218 in the House. Create a balanced budget amendment. What do you need? Well, you need 290 in the House, you need 67 in the Senate, and you need many hundreds in state governments to get that done. And your total adds up to thousands of people you've got to persuade in order to get that done. So which do you choose? Isn't garnering of only 218 in the House easier than getting 290 in the House, 67 in the Senate, and majorities in both houses of state legislatures? Also, isn't the First Amendment safer? Won't it protect the Constitution? Use the Constitution. Don't abuse it. Don't change it. The safe and elected solution elect reliable members to the House of Representatives. Then the Senate, then the presidency. But if the House of Representatives will start using the muscle that it already has, called the power of the purse, senators would catch on, and maybe even we'd have a president that we'd be proud of. Now, I like to refer to James Madison. He was the 4th president of our country. He's rightly called the father of the Constitution. He's the one who took notes at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. He's one of the authors of the Federalist Papers to explain the Constitution to the farmers in New York State. He's the author of the Bill of Rights. He became a member of Congress, and he's an opponent of another con-con. What did he say? He said the authority given to conduct the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 was limited and was for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. They went beyond that mandate. And so a year later, Madison wrote a letter, and in that letter he said, having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, which assembled under very propitious circumstances, I should tremble for the result of a second. Right? What were the very propitious circumstances? Well, the very first of them was it was led by George Washington. George Washington, who had such stature and who was so highly regarded by all of those men that when he entered the room, everybody hushed. Right? And he was the head of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Very propitious circumstance there. Another comment, Judge Robert Bork, recently deceased. It is my view that a federal constitutional convention could not be limited to a single issue. The original Philadelphia Convention went well beyond the purposes for which it was called, and nobody has suggested the Constitution is a nullity for that reason. Interpret the Constitution. Now, you ask your co-workers, your neighbors, maybe you and your spouse, maybe somebody else you know, your people you run across, what's the job of the Supreme Court? And almost everybody, if they have any answer at all, will say it's to interpret the Constitution, which is dead wrong. It's not to interpret the Constitution. The task is to rule that a measure is or is not constitutional. Most decisions should be state at the end of it, it's none of our business, and handing the matter back down to the states and to the people themselves. We wrongly allow leaders to make a federal case out of virtually everything. When I was a boy growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I would skin my knee. There weren't many grassy plots around there. And I'd come in and I'd be bawling my eyes out, and my mother would say, "Oh, stop making a federal case out of it." Maybe your mother said the same, right? But they make a federal case. We do over and over again. Now, beginning in 1988, the John Birch Society and a few allies persuaded state legislators in 18 different states to rescind all of the previous con-con calls, whether it was for a balanced budget amendment or term limits or opposed to abortion or flag burning or whatever. Our attitude was simply that it doesn't matter what issue. If a state has a call for a constitutional convention, it's one of the 30 some odd that are needed in order to call a constitutional convention. So we asked the state legislators to cancel all previous calls for a constitutional convention. And the states of Alabama, Arizona, Georgia, Idaho, Florida, Louisiana, Montana, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, Utah, and Wyoming did as was asked. They wiped the slates clean. Florida then came back later and issued a new con-con call. So the 18 is now down to 17 that have totally rescinded all their, right? But the other process to control an out-of-control Congress is nullification. In 2005, Congress enacted what is called the Real ID Act. requiring a federal ID for everybody in the United States. 24 states have refused to implement it, and we don't have a Real ID Act. It wasn't repealed. This is what's called nullification. The states can do that, and 24 states did, and so the federal government does not enforce the Real ID Act. Nullification was advocated by Thomas Jefferson, that a nullification by those sovereignties, the states, of all unauthorized acts done under the color of that instrument, the Constitution, is the rightful remedy. More of that should happen. There's a wonderful book written by a good friend of mine named Dr. Thomas E. Woods about nullification. The title of the book is Nullification. Right? And it's really a small book because half of what you see in the book is appendix. Right? You can get the gist of what he's saying. He's quoting Jefferson, he's quoting others. The book has been praised by Judge Andrew Napolitano, columnist Walter Williams, Barry Goldwater Jr., the John Birch Society, numerous others. Nullification is an option. Here's James Madison again. Nullification of a law can belong rightly to a single state as one of the parties of the Constitution. The state not ceasing to avow its adherence to the entire Constitution by nullifying something. Summarize. A con-con is constitutionally legitimate, but a con-con cannot be limited. There has to be something that says having a con-con would be a mistake, or else we would have had one in 200 and almost 240 years. There never has been another. I don't want to see another. Excuse me. Oh, you're gonna water for me here. Is it just water? I'm Irish. I'm Irish. It's just water. Just water. A con-con cannot be limited. Wisdom has prevented creation of a con-con for the past 220, maybe it's more than 220 years now. Alternatives to a con-con include forcing Congress to abide by its solemn oath and nullification of unconstitutional measures. So I'm going to go back to lost awareness, where we started. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. Right? Wouldn't you like to see them teaching that in all the government schools, right? So who should you listen to? The John Birch Society loves the Constitution enough to want to preserve it. Some con-con promoters, some calling their proposal a convention of the states, claim to love it, but they seek to change it, even endanger its very existence. I think that's a mistake. So we've got to choose good leadership. Do we choose neoconservatives?
No.
Rhinos?
No.
Unreliable politicians?
No.
Establishment leftists?
No.
Why not choose leadership from the John Birch Society? Now just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, just imagine. Several hundred well-informed and well-organized citizens spreading sound information in a congressional district and then in hundreds of districts. That's the goal of the John Birch Society. Right? It has already worked in some parts of the country. There's no reason why it couldn't work here. There's no reason why it couldn't work even in Massachusetts or Rhode Island. Right? Several hundred, and I'm talking what, 300, 400, 500 people in a congressional district can sway the whole district. Maybe not inner city New York, that would take a few more. But this is the plan. It's always been the plan. We got a book table, we got a motto. Less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. So we say to people, look, you're good, you have a good group here, keep at it. Maybe some of you want to also join the John Birch Society. That's good. We'll be glad to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.